Welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. Today we're getting into a topic that may not tug at your heartstrings the way some of our stories do, but it might tug at your wallet in a good way.
That's because we are talking about the adoption tax credit, including some big changes that are coming thanks to the big, beautiful bill. Whether you're just starting to explore adoption, maybe you're already matched, maybe you're finalizing your adoption in 2025, you will definitely want to listen today and understand how this tax credit can help support your journey.
Yes, the tax credit has been something that adoptive parents always have questions about and seek understanding for their personal circumstances. So today we're going to focus on a little bit about what it is, but also the update, right? The exciting
Definitely.
update. So Heather, let's start at the top. What even is a tax credit?
That's a great question, especially because, it's almost like when taxes come up, I can hear people kind of starting to tune out. But this is really, really good to understand. A tax credit is an amount of money that directly reduces the taxes you owe to the federal government. Think of it like a coupon. Okay. If you owe, say, $7,000 in taxes, and you qualify for a $5,000 tax credit, or in this case, your coupon, then you only owe $2,000.
And it's different from a tax deduction, which just reduces your taxable income. A deduction might save you some money, but a credit is dollar for dollar, much more powerful.
Right, right. And the adoption tax credit, it is a non-refundable credit, except until now. That's really, I think, the biggest, most exciting change. That means that with the changes to the adoption tax credit, it can reduce your tax liability down to zero, and part of the credit becomes refundable after that, which we'll explain in a few minutes. We'll dig a little deeper. But I really want to pause for a second because, you know, families often get kind of tripped up right around here. They hear us talking about credits and deductions, and they're thinking, well, but wait, isn't this just part of my tax refund? Not exactly.
hmm Right. So here's the deal. When you work, taxes are taken out of your paycheck throughout the year. That's called withholding. At the end of the year, you file your taxes, and the IRS calculates your tax liability, which is just a fancy way of saying what you owe in federal taxes based on your income. So, out of your income, what percentage of that should you have paid throughout the year or that you now owe if you didn't pay it throughout the year
Right.
to the government?
Right. So if you had more money withheld from your paycheck than you actually owe, that's when you get a refund. But what the adoption tax credit does is it reduces the amount of tax you owe, not increase your refund directly. That's really an important distinction. It doesn't increase your refund, it reduces the amount of taxes you owe.
So, if you owe $5,000 in taxes and qualify for a $5,000 tax credit, you now owe zero. If you already paid in $4,000 through paycheck withholding, you'll get that back as a refund. But you're not getting an extra $5,000 just because you adopted. It all depends on how your tax liability shakes out. And sometimes what I suggest to adoptive parents is, hey, if you have a tax person or a friend who is tax savvy, maybe take your most recent tax forms
Mhm.
over and from like the previous year and just say, hey, if I was to have adopted in that year, what would that have looked like for me based on the rules of today?
Right. And that's why the new partial refundability aspect is so helpful. Because starting in 2025, even if you don't owe a lot of taxes, you can still get up to $5,000 of the credit refunded to you. That means more families can actually use the credit.
hmm And of course, never take tax advice from an adoption professional. So or a podcast host, or even two podcast
Right.
hostesses, we always recommend talking to a tax pro, but hopefully this gives you a clearer picture of how it works.
Right.
So now that we understand what a credit is, let's talk about what the adoption tax credit covers. This credit is designed to help families with the cost of adoption, which, as we all know, can really add up.
So the adoption tax credit, it covers what they call qualified expenses. And qualified expenses actually include most things that families pay for in the course of an adoption. Things like your home study fees, including any costs for background checks. They will include fees to adoption professionals, such as agencies or attorneys, your court costs, your finalization costs, travel expenses related to the adoption. Even if you're adopting internationally, those travel expenses will count. And really any other necessary adoption related expenses.
And just to clarify, this credit is for each child that you adopt. So if you adopt siblings or twins, you may be eligible for two credits.
Exactly. And another piece, Kim, that some people don't realize is there's also another benefit called the employer provided adoption assistance exclusion. That's a lot of words that says if your employer has an adoption benefit as part of your benefit package at work, and what that looks like is your employer will give you $2, $3, $4,000, even up to over $25,000. Some employers provide that money is excluded from your taxable income as well, up to the same limit.
hmm So let's get into what's changing in 2025 and why we're even doing this topic today on the Let's Talk Adoption podcast. This is the big news.
Right. So for the 2025 tax year, which means the tax return most people will file in 2026, the maximum adoption tax credit is increasing to $17,280 per child. That's up about $500 from 2024. It's not a huge increase, but in this case, really every dollar counts.
hmm And another important change starting in 2025, the credit is now indexed to inflation. That means it will adjust automatically over time to keep pace with rising costs. No more waiting on Congress to bump the number, which as people who work with adoptive families year in, year out for decades now, we have seen as we are interested in the tax credit and as we answer adoptive families questions, we notice that it increases year to year, but every year you have to wait and see is it increasing or wait and see what else might be changing. What are the requirements? Sometimes it's refundable, sometimes they change the wording year to year. But what this is doing is making that adjustment so that it increases every year. It's reliable. I remember, Heather, back in the day, over however many years ago, around 20 years ago, the big thing for adoptive parents was they wanted to make the tax credit permanent.
Right.
And so that was the big battle that they won back in that day. I wish we had the year, but ever since then, it just kind of adjusted year to year. And now it's becoming something that you can count on even more in a reliable way as new adoptive parents coming into the world of adoption now. So this is really cool.
Right. And with that change, the income limits are changing too. And by income limits, this is a tax credit that phases out at certain income levels. So for 2025, the tax credit starts to phase out for families when they have a modified adjusted gross income above $259,000. And the tax credit is completely phased out just under $300,000.
So if your income is under that threshold, you may qualify for the full credit. And I know we also have a relationship with your adoption finance coach and Kelly Ellison. I was talking with her recently, and she wanted families to be sure to understand that just because it phases out, it begins to phase out, it doesn't mean you don't get anything. You just start to
Right.
get a little less at those higher income levels. And if anyone's interested in trivia, I did just Google when was the federal adoption tax credit made permanent. So without any further expense, it was made a permanent part of the tax code in 2013 with the passage of American Taxpayer Relief Act of, or the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012.
Awesome. That's like a good trivia
It was
question.
that was fun, right? And that just tells you how long we've been sitting around here talking about adoption.
If you have more questions on this, obviously your CPA is a great place to start. And also, the IRS maintains information on the adoption tax credit, but I will tell you, it has not been updated yet. So we'll definitely put a link into our show notes page, but just know, we're more on top of it than the IRS is today.
And normally, I always refer families to irs.gov to get the specific details that matter today. Because if you're Googling and researching and watching YouTube videos and all kinds of videos, or even this podcast, you have to understand context and who is saying that and when it was.
Hmm.
Because I think that's what can be a little conflicting and confusing for families is that they read one blog post over here and then hear a YouTube video over here, and it's explained, the tax credit is explained in different ways. But the best
Right.
thing to do is just go to irs.gov, except for like right this very second.
Right.
You're getting the
So,
best information here.
yeah. So let's talk about the partial refundability a minute, because I believe, I mean, for me, this is the most exciting change, especially for families who have a modest or even lower income, because, obviously they're going to qualify for the full adoption tax credit. But the fact that it is partially refundable really is a game changer.
hmm That means if you qualify for the credit but don't owe enough taxes to use all of it, for example, maybe you have a lot of withholding because of your job, you could still get up to $5,000 back as a refund.
Right. Let me give you an example here. So let's say a family qualifies for the full $17,000 tax credit, but they only owe $3,000 in taxes that year. In the past, you'd get your $3,000 in taxes back. That's what you would get because it's being offset by that adoption tax credit. But you would lose the rest. So starting in 2025, that same family, not only would they get their $3,000 in federal taxes back that they owe, they could potentially receive an additional $5,000 as a refund check, even though they don't owe any more in taxes.
hmm And usually the irs.gov website will also mention how many years the remainder of the federal adoption tax credit can be carried forward. And I believe it is 5 years, but you'll always want to reference that
Hmm.
in the year that you're planning to apply for this. So,
Hmm.
this $5,000 as a refund is such a game changer for many adoptive families, especially those adopting through foster care, kinship placements, or, single parents that are adopting or
Right,
on a single income, whether they're a married couple or a single parent.
right. And let me explain a little bit more why that is, Kim, because families who adopt through the foster system or with kinship placements, they may not have really qualified for much before, but this will really help with that. So it makes adoption more accessible and less financially stressful for, I think, most families who feel called to adopt.
hmm Yes, and for families who are maybe adopting for their first time but want to adopt again, they can put these funds toward their next adoption.
Right.
A lot of the benefit of the tax credit and all these amazing things that are available now, it's not something you get on the front end.
Hmm.
So, using this and kind of being strategic about it and already keeping in mind your next adoption, I mean, this could really help, springboard you into that next adoption
Hmm.
financially.
Hmm.
Now, let's talk about something we get asked about a lot. What if my adoption expenses are low, but I adopted a child with special needs?
That's another aspect of this new change. And there is a special needs exception. If your child qualifies as having special needs, usually defined by the state where the adoption took place, you can claim the full credit even if you didn't have significant out of pocket costs.
hmm In many foster care adoptions, for example, the expenses are very minimal or covered by the state, but the child is considered special needs due to age, sibling status, or background.
Mhm. And when that's the case, you usually receive some type of documentation or letter or certification from the state confirming the child's status. That is so important to hang on to and keep that for your tax records and for your finalization records, but just hang on to that because that may mean that you qualify for the full adoption tax credit even if you didn't have much in the way of expenses.
Another newer provision worth mentioning is this. Under the latest changes, Indian tribal governments can now determine whether a child qualifies as having special needs.
Mhm. And that's important. Obviously, I think this is for Native American adoptions, but it's important because it gives, I shouldn't say it gives tribal sovereignty. Tribes have sovereignty in making adoption decisions, but it also gives them that sovereignty in making these determinations about Native American children and families. And it also will help making that tax credit more accessible for Native American adoptive parents.
It's a small detail, but really a meaningful one for inclusivity and access.
Definitely. So I feel like we've given you a giant condensed version of taxes here in our time together. But, I think it's really important to leave you with some practical advice on, okay, we're adopting, we're in the process. What do we do with all this information?
hmm Number one, keep records. Save all your receipts for every expense tied to your adoption, even if it's just a plane ticket to meet the expectant mom or mileage for court visits. Keep a log.
Secondly, if you don't know, ask your employer if they offer adoption assistance benefits. Kim, this is one of those workplace benefits that is rarely used. You may be able to get reimbursed for some costs and take advantage of the tax exclusion in that case directly from your place of work, even if you work someplace where you're thinking, I'm sure they don't. In fact, let me throw one out there. Wendy's. Wendy's, obviously founded by Dave Thomas, they have one of the larger adoption assistance programs that is out there. And it doesn't matter what your role is at Wendy's, you qualify for a pretty substantial adoption assistance benefit. If your employer does not provide adoption assistance, you can advocate for that. You can go to the Dave Thomas Foundation. They have an adoption friendly workplace toolkit that gives employees the information they need to help advocate for that at their place of work.
And Heather, the other day when I was talking with Kelly from YAFC, your adoption
Hmm.
finance coach, she said that her team just launched something new that if you find out you don't have adoption tax benefits from your employer, that she can connect with them and show them how to get it set up.
Oh,
So if
awesome.
you want to connect with Kelly, just email me, kim@lifetimeadoption.com, and I'll get you in touch with her.
Hmm. Great.
Number three, talk to a tax professional, preferably one familiar with adoption. They'll know how to help you file correctly and take full advantage of the credit.
And lastly, you know, share this episode with other families you know in the process of adopting. So many people don't think they qualify or they think it's too complicated. And I'll admit it does sound complicated, but I promise it's not. And the financial help you can get can really be huge.
hmm So whether you're planning to finalize your adoption in 2025 or if you're just starting out, it's worth knowing that this tax credit exists and that it's getting better. And the most important part about this as adoptive parents, you don't have to know all the ins and outs and be tax and financially savvy. Just the awareness that you know to ask about this, and now you know who to ask. A tax person and your adoption professional can also help you with getting all the records that you need to keep the proof of what you spent on your adoption. I know
Right.
at Lifetime Adoption, the adoption coordinators keep all of your documents stored in your portal. So you
Mhm.
just download them there.
Mhm. And I think it goes without saying that, we all understand that adoption takes heart, it takes faith, it takes preparation, it takes patience. It takes a lot of work just to get ready to adopt, but it also takes planning. And part of that planning is financial planning. And really, the more prepared you are, the more knowledgeable you are about the help and assistance that's out there, the smoother the journey will be for you.
Thanks for listening today. If this episode helped you, please subscribe, leave us a review, and most of all, share it with someone else who's walking the adoption path.
Until next time, take care and keep moving forward on your adoption journey.
Bye for now. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.